indicates, we wish to create in this morning session a vibrant and dynamic conversation between all the participants rather than to hold a more structured panel of speakers. Our aim is to open potentially new and interesting direction for thinking about ethnographic research through this discussion. In order to create a common ground for the rest of the day, in the first part of our discussion, I'll introduce some of the main dilemmas and questions we'd like to discuss, and we'll ask each of the participants to express his or her views so we can have a broad basis for our discussion. And later on, in the second part of the discussion, we would like to open the stage for a more open symposium, and some of the conversation in a more free manner. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce our participants. We're very honored to have here Dr. Tzvi Beckelman from the School of Education from the Hebrew University, Professor Tamar El-Or from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Hebrew University, Dr. Galit Eilon from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Bar-Ilan University, and we're very honored to have here Professor Stanley Brandes from the University of Berkeley. Very happy Stanley could join us today. In order to start our conversation, I'd like to share with you, the participants and the audience, some of the dilemmas that we face while planning this conference, and I believe that through this practical example that I will tell you about in a minute, it illustrates in a way the broad question that we wish to discuss, and to serve this kind of example will serve as a base for our discussion later on. Oh, right. Just before we begin, we were supposed to have Professor Shelley Neumann with us today as one of the participants, but unfortunately for personal reasons she wasn't able to join us, so we will hold the discussion without her. So where was I? The practical example. So when we were reviewing candidates' applications submitted for our conference roundtables, which will take place later on today, we ran into scholars and students' application which research relied mainly on interview-based research while holding sporadic participant observation in different and separate sites. What puzzled us was the fact that these scholars were not necessarily conducting research in one defined field, but rather were conducting observations, interviews, and data collection from multiple sites. And another issue that we noticed was related to the quantity of materials being collected. We had from large quantities of observations and interviews to a more limited variation of materials being collected. And while reviewing these materials, we were wondering how should one relate to such research work, and should such research be part of a conference that deals with ethnography per se. So through this example of the dilemma that we encounter while preparing for the conference, the broader theoretical question that we want to deal with is exposed. How should we define ethnographic research? Is ethnography merely a research method, or is it a worldview, a type of a perspective? Does ethnography have boundaries, and if so, what are they, or how can we define them? So as I mentioned earlier, first I'd like to ask each and every one of you to express his or her views in turns, so we can have a basis for our discussion, and later on we'll open it for a more open conversation. So first, if you could please describe briefly your connection to today's conference on ethnography, and express your opinion and feedback. Due to the time frame, I'll ask each of you to, at this stage, to talk for about 5 to 8 minutes, and later on we'll open it for the discussion. Thank you. So, Tzvi, please.
I do it because I'm well behaved. Otherwise, I wouldn't start. I think it's impolite to start. Okay? So my connection to the conference was the first question. Aviv Kohen. He told me about it. He asked me to come. I said yes, and I'm here. That's okay. True, I'm not strange to the issues that are being raised in this conference. Personally, my work is ethnographic work in the field of education. and I spend a lot of time inside classrooms, inside schools, and at some other less formal settings. And most of the time I spend it with video cameras and recording equipment. And I'm tremendously lucky that I'm still able to find teachers that are crazy enough to agree to that. Without them, I wouldn't have a career. Or clearly, I wouldn't be checking things that I care about. So that's my connection. I have the 4 questions here. So the first one was, what is a legitimate ethnography? And the context was, if I understood it properly, the students that go around doing ethnographies, very short ones, a day here, a day there. Okay, and the second part of the question says, if it is possible to speak about a appropriate ethnography. So I don't have big general answers. Okay, so but I think I can answer the same part. I wouldn't like to have a student, or I wouldn't take a student that wants to do one day of ethnography here and there, and in a separate setting somewhere else. That doesn't mean that I think it's bad, but it's not for me. And regarding the question about the appropriateness of ethnography, I wrote that I would think that it's inappropriate, any research effort that is not ready to confront seriously complexity, and that is not serious about making decisions about which is the maximal context it can try to account for. So those are I think those are my rules, though I've never been asked exactly the question this way. That's what I answered. The second question was about what makes an appropriate ethnography. So the answer is clear. Lack of contextualization, lack of time in the field, lack of seriousness about trying to account for complexity. The third question was if ethnography is a worldview or is it a methodology? So I would love to lie and say that I think it's only a methodology. And I criticize myself a lot because many times I'm not careful enough making sure that people understand when I think I'm crossing the border between the methodological and the world. But since I do what I do in education, and I think that education suffers tremendously from the invasion of a psychological worldview, then I many times find myself moving from one to the other. Okay? I think I should be much more careful doing that. And I'm committed to keep struggling and failing while doing that. But at least I try to tell the people that hear what I have to say, that they should be more careful than what I am. So that's the third. The fourth question is about if anthropology should be the discipline that makes final decisions. I don't think anthropologists think that. So I hope they don't. I mean, why should they, right? True, it's a central to interdiscipline. True that they have contributed to the world, but between that and taking ownership or sole ownership, I don't think that anthropologists think that way. If they do, they should. they should join anyone that cares about good ethnographic work. And just keep telling others to do a good ethnographic work. That's it. אם לא שמעו זה טוב דווקא.
לא, אני חושבת ששומעים, לא?
קשה לשמוע.
לא שומעים, זה distortion. Okay, so it's always, each of these questions is so, it opens like, of course, a day of discussion, so I'll try to describe the canopy under which I can understand or I can relate to these questions, and that's the tension between two things that I think characterize ethnography is ambiguity versus directness, or I would say directness in English, but in Hebrew I would say bilti emtsai, without any, or with a limitation of intermediate mechanisms, like to have a direct contact with those that I wish to learn about and to understand and to share my experience or their experience actually with mine and vice versa. So on one end it's the directness, which is a sort of a term for me, to be in direct contact with, lately for me is also material objects and by now they're not called objects anymore, but to be in direct contact with the source of knowledge that I wish to learn and produce. So that's one side. And on the other side, I don't know if it stands in direct opposition with, like, that you can say that it's a binary division here between directness and ambiguity. Maybe it isn't, but that's the other end. It's anthropology enjoys ambiguity, either as an epistemology, which was described here as a worldview, because there is a direct correlation between the epistemology, the methodology, and the methods. So the epistemology has to have some order, philosophical order, which under our scientific, or within our scientific context, needs to make some sense. I wouldn't say logic, but some sense, yes. But the ambiguity is what makes I would like to have enough ambiguity that will produce enough flexibility for the work in the field. So as long as I have a direct contact, like you were saying, that you come into the class with the recording material and with cameras. That in the Orthodox, although anthropologists have always, since the early days, our like mothers and fathers of the field have recorded, thankfully. I mean, I'm thankful for them doing this, and filmed. It's already a question in Orthodox ethnography, and I've been running for the fourth year now the Ethnographic Film Festival with the Cinematheque, and the issues that you described, like what would stand as an ethnographic film within the documentary genre. So it's always those questions that on one hand anthropologists have loved to leave as under this ambiguity that your teachers always tell you, you'll know when you get there. You know, like when you are pregnant and you say, what is the time to go to the hospital? You'll know. You know. So this like kitchen that is our recipe is so, you know, we keep it secure until we go through the process and then we become true anthropologists because we've done that. Or as Geertz said in Works and Lives, we've been there. And we've proven that we've been there. So generally speaking, I would say, for me, it's this tension between the directness and the ambiguity within which I wish to work, minimizing the mechanisms in between, but of course acknowledging them and using them as we also proceed into a new era
with students doing an ethnography in the net, on the internet, in those communities out there, which are true communities, and we have a lot of good research coming on communities like family forums on WhatsApp. I think someone is doing a PhD on it. It's probably an interesting one. Is it ethnography? Is it not? And this thing, the connection between epistemology, methodology, and methods, which I try to manage in a scientific way, a good enough scientific way, and with the combination of the two, is to also maybe retain and keep a free zone of being allowed to be interested in everything, because the politics and the restricts that the politics of science have put upon anthropologists, who is eligible, who is good enough, or who is legitimate for, because you brought up legitimacy. Who am I allowed to research within imperialism, colonialism, ethnicism, gender, nation, everything? That primitive versus modern, which was the case, studying up, studying across, all those political questions. I would like to see ethnography sailing around with awareness and criticism and reflexivity, of course, and keeping the right to be interested in everything.
A little bit about my background. I'm originally an organizational ethnographer, and in the past 3 years I've stepped out a bit out of my original field, and I've started studying the Israeli financial culture. And it's a big change, but So I'll speak today as an organizational ethnographer. Regarding your first question was about what makes a legitimate or worthy ethnography, and it was much easier for me to think about what makes an illegitimate or unworthy ethnography, as all of you know. But legitimacy, I think, is situated. It's dependent on the discipline to a large extent, and that's why some ethnographers have to struggle for their legitimacy more than others. Within the organizational field, what makes a worthy ethnography, in my view, it's an ethnography. I think ethnographers have a very important role in organization studies, because the everyday life of people in organizations are usually not a part of the concepts of value in organizations, and are not perceived as part of organization's main purpose. And I think that this is what makes human history within an organization, the everyday life of the people who lived it. And so a worthy ethnography within this field is an ethnography that documents and describes and reveals or discusses people's everyday life within the organization. Much of organization and management theory is developed under the shadow of the profit goal and management and engineering concepts that are the basis of this discipline. And ethnographers have a very important role, I think, in this discipline. And another answer to the question of what makes a worthy ethnography, if I look back at everything that I read, I don't think there are many books that are, that made like really long-lasting impression on me, but those that did were usually ethnographies. And I think that the main reason for that has to do with the type of learning that they set in motion. When you look at the specific details of everyday life, you learn not because from one context to another, not because the details are the same, but because the learning process relies on sensitivity, social sensitivity to nuance and to detail, and an opening of the horizons of the social thinking. And so an ethnography that can have that effect, for me, is a worthy ethnography. And I think that this is the greatest value of ethnographic work, that it sets in motion or enables this type of learning, a learning that relies on social sensitivity and sort of like the broadening of the social horizons. And then you had a question, what makes ethnography shallow or
superficial.
Superficial. So my answer to that, I think that the biggest problem in ethnography, in a lot of research, not only ethnography, is when you think you know what you want to find, when you go into the field with a sense of answer, or with an answer that you're already in love with before you enter the field, when you come with a grand narrative, or a sense of that you know the story before you even stepped into the site. I think that makes, when you're committed to the story before you've begun, before you've met the people, I think this makes ethnography. This is a big obstacle, in my view. Okay, and then there was a question. Third question. Is it a worldview or a method? Well, to the extent that ethnography, do I believe that the study of culture and meaning is important? In that sense, it's a perspective or a worldview for me. But I'm very careful not to turn ethnography into an ideology. I think ethnography is a method. It's good for the goals that it's supposed to, for its intellectual and academic goals. But I'm very careful, or I try to be careful not to turn it into an ideology. There's something, I think, in my experience of ethnographic, despite the fact that I agree with you that in a sense you're in the field, something is direct in your interaction, and yet it's also, there's not a fullness of presence in the same way that I think should exist in other contexts of action that are not academic and are not research oriented. So for me, I'm very careful not to look at it or not to turn it into an ideology. Okay. And then the last question. Authority. The authority. It's in here. I have to translate it.
I have you.
It's in here. Yeah.
Oh, it's a okay.
Yeah. So about authority, the authority of anthropology. So my answer to that is, I think no, and I think it's quite ironic that as a discipline that really gives or renders context so important, that it would see itself or assume an authority over every disciplinary context. For example, within the field of organizational studies, there are business anthropologists who are anthropologists in their disciplinary background, in contrast to organizational ethnographers. There are some commonalities, but it's two distinct groups, subgroups in the field. And I'm not sure that the business anthropologists deserve the authority here within this field. In organizations, There's a long tradition of looking at organizational culture as this soft and slippery but manageable variable that can be dialed up or toned down to assist the goal of effectivity, of better services, better products, more profit. And that's a problematic concept in my mind. And it is perhaps paradoxically the organizational ethnographers that have done much to criticize this concept, and not the business anthropologists. So I guess it depends. My answer is not, it depends, and not.
Maybe.
Well, yeah, it
Just
doesn't
a
matter.
free translation.
Can you hear me if I talk this way, or should I use the, well, I don't see much difference anyway. I'm just wondering, I'm Jewish, so I'm answering a question with a question. I want to know if you came up with the 4 questions during Pesach. Why there were 4 questions, and why we received the questions around Pesach. I agree with and have learned from everything that my colleagues have said. I only have one question. What Tamar means by ambiguity. That's the only thing that I didn't get in everything that was said. So I'm going to start off with a question. Being Jewish.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That
Directness, I understand.
Galit said, don't come with the story known to you or the meta-narrative. That I meant that ambiguity vis-a-vis the method as a method. What should I do? You know, when you dialogue with also the ambiguity is something that you also maybe you phrase it differently by saying, how do I manage my directness or my presence in the field? That it's not like you are in work. It's not something that you are in full contact with someone that can be intimate or can be, friends of you, family of you. There is something that always stays not totally clear that I try to retain in the field. Where do I? It opens up. If someone asks me, you related to Pesach, so I'll go back to Pesach. Working among ultra-Orthodox women, after Purim, you start cleaning for Pesach. And the question may rise, and it's an intentional question, by some of the women, so have you started the preparation for Pesach? Knowing that maybe the right answer from me will be yes, at those times I bought pitot or bread and I put it in the deep freezer. Do I want to say that? Should I say that? Or should I answer, or why should I say that? I would say, I started like I start. I'm doing what I usually do. Yeah, I started like I usually do. So I keep my answers. I try to say my own truth in a way, but the ambiguity is to try and keep the things always, as I said, flexible, open, waiting for the tennis ball to come across, and so I can return it. So it's never. So in a sense, it's managing the directness. The ambiguity manages this contact because I am in contact. Because there is something that's pseudo relations that are not under the canopy of work. When you come with a questionnaire to ask someone, so okay, you are questioning me. But when you just spend the afternoon in the playground with the kids and the mothers, and you sit there like another mother, Jewish mother with kids, with them, so what is actually happening here? So that's the ambiguity and the directness, and you try to keep both of them alive.
Okay. I think, if we talk about legitimacy of ethnography and whether anthropology should be the measure is really how successful the product is. I think there's always going to be disagreement among scholars as to the quality of any scholarly work, and that includes any ethnographic work. So, it's kind of to me, a very difficult question to answer, whether anthropologists should really decide what is good ethnography or not. But it was an anthropologist, Bronislaw Malinowski, who actually set out the guidelines of ethnography. And that isn't to say that others before Malinowski actually produced ethnographies, but he was the first person to actually problematize this method and to set out the requirements for what it would be. And a lot of the elements that he brought into his introduction to his Argonauts of the Western Pacific have been mentioned by my colleagues, but I'll just mention a few of them. One is the direct contact. You have to actually live with and participate in. Participant observation should also be mentioned, that this expression that we always use, that's a fundamental part of ethnography. That is, you participate and observe at the same time among the people you're studying. So the direct contact with the people, the long period of time, as has been mentioned, studying these people, and certainly, a person who tries to do a very superficial, quick couple of visits to a setting and then write about it is not going to get the kind of depth or analytical understanding that you get if you spend a long time in the field. It used to be said a year, but with such a, and because of anthropologists anyway started out in rural agricultural based or very low-level technological based societies where the annual cycle of the weather and environmental conditions were important, but I don't think there's any specific amount of time that should be spent in the field, but a long time. And the attention to detail is very, very important. As Galit said, not to, others as well, not to ignore any specific little detail, and use of the language. Because part of ethnography, I think, is a very important part of ethnography is creation of a certain distance that might be difficult if you are working in your own language. I am a person who, I've done ethnographies, well, most of my ethnographies have been done in a foreign language. And I'm partial to that. And it used to be an absolute requirement for anthropologists to work in a language other than your own because you problematize, well, what you are as a child. You become equivalent to a child learning the rules of your society if you don't speak a language. It also allows you to make mistakes, which then people correct. If you know the language well, you already have to follow the rules. Because if you don't, you're an impolite person. You're just uneducated and poorly brought up. But if you can't speak the language, all sorts of things will be forgiven, and you are taught the way a child is taught. And so as an adult, you're kind of replicating the educational process that a child goes through until finally, when you leave the field, you become a full-fledged member of the society. I've never worked in Israel, for example, because I don't speak Hebrew. I would never work in a country where I didn't master the language. I just couldn't do it unless I was willing to. Here, it would take me 3 years I could do it in a Latin-speaking country because it would take me 6 months or something, or 3 months in a language that I didn't know. Let's see. I guess that's all I have to say. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, for now.
It will be hard to summarize all we heard, but I think the idea of complexity that's been mentioned, and the idea of being sensitive society, and this tension between directness and ambiguity, and we heard, I think, kind of an inside perspective of what anthropology should be. I want to bring maybe my own personal experience in order to broaden this conversation about the boundaries. I don't come from anthropology, I come from education as well. And while I was writing my methodology chapter of my dissertation, I thought I was doing ethnography, and I wrote, I'm doing ethnography research. And my advisor told me, no, you shouldn't write that. You should write something like multiple case studies bounded in grounded theory. And he really didn't want me to use the term ethnography. And he thought it was too much in the field of anthropology, and that would be problematic. I think go back to the ambiguity in the field of education. It's something they don't want to hear. So just based on this example, if we want to broaden the boundaries of this field, what are the challenges that we face? Should we broaden them? Should we be bounded only in this specific discipline? What are your thoughts about not only inside the discipline, but rather, and it goes back to the question of the worldview of ethnography. Any thoughts? How would you advise your students?
Do you think that you got the idea for this conference because of your own experience writing a dissertation? Yeah.
Well, or collective, but yeah.
Yeah, and because of this experience.
And this constant questioning that you have.
To me, fields of study are historical accidents, in a way. I mean, knowledge is broken up into different fields for very political and usually financial reasons. And we defend our disciplines by publishing in certain places and hiring people with certain degrees as a way to promote our own careers and those of our students and so forth. But if you look at any 50-year period, you're going to find a kind of merging and reorganization of knowledge. I mean, knowledge is not, these are inventions of culture, these disciplines. And so I really would never, I'm sorry that, as an anthropologist in particular, that your advisor asked you not to use the word ethnography. But in addition, it doesn't, using the word or not would not invalidate what you wrote. I mean, if it was based on certain methods and I think there is a process of transcending your own cultural assumptions and being able to communicate across boundaries, but those boundaries aren't disciplinary boundaries, they're cultural boundaries, they're social boundaries. They're not disciplinary boundaries. Disciplinary boundaries are just inventions of academic, they're either accidents or political decisions that are made at one time or another that turn out to be practical ways of hiring and not hiring. That's just my feeling. I don't know whether anthropology or education will even have the same name 100 years from now, as fields. Who knows?
Yeah, but there is a sort of division between the disciplines are, of course, political creations or organizational predictions, but the production of knowledge has different ways of doing it. I mean, when we try to produce the same knowledge about the same phenomena, my professor of sociology, Dr. Cordova, said to us, first year sociology, the world does not appear under the divisions of faculties in the university. The world is the world, okay? And that I got. All I got is, most of what I got is from Dr. Cordova. And then from there on, there are ways of reaching or negotiating with this world. And there are very many ways, all okay. But so I would like to defend the studying of ethnography, a sort of sincere studying and serious studying and experience of ethnography as a way to know the world and to try to keep it as a way, not the hygienic, to keep it for us, and not let anyone do it. But okay, just this morning on the way on the train, I erased from a text of my student who wrote, and therefore I would do a ground theory. And I said, what's ground theory? No ground theory, because she comes from organizational, and somehow grounded theory is legit. It's like nobody really knows what it is on the other field, so it's just like, okay, grounded theory. So it's just no, you are going, because she's actually doing ethnography. Hey, you are doing ethnography. It's not grounded theory. So in this sense, you can mix. I always mix methods. I mix different methods. But I would like my students to get a good grip, good understanding, good experience of doing ethnography. And I believe, as Galit said, in the power of ethnography to tell the world. And therefore, and I know that the difficulties in other disciplines of saying, I don't want those anecdotes and stories, I need something solid. Give me life stories, that goes very strong in education, life histories or grounded theory, and etc. So that is something I'm ready to fight for. But I would like to keep this, to keep and to teach from generation to generation the power of ethnography, which is at the end a production of a sort of a text. It could be a filmographic text, visual text, we're going to talk about it, but mainly for now textual text to tell the world.
Well, I'm not sure what to say. First, I think that everything we write to a certain audience. It's in a certain, an intersubjective dialogue. And in your case, I'm not too familiar with the educational field, but there's a question of you're trying to persuade your audience, to convince them that you have something to tell them that is worthy of reading the text. And then there's the question of how you persuade them that this is the way, or that you have a question, but this is the way to answer it. And this is the basic, the methodology is primarily a question, I think, of finding the right means to answer, the right means to the goal. And then there's the question of whether, if your advisor advises you not to use the word ethnography,
Poor advisor.
Yeah, but it could be I can try to understand why. For example, in some fields, in the organization field, for example, ethnography is like this word that people sometimes use for a sense of like a method of anything goes. And so they can't completely justify what they did, so they use the word ethnography as a cover term of what the anthropologists do, so it's scientific and legitimate in a sense. And then ethnography, the word itself, has a marketing history in a different discipline. Okay, it's a brand. It's a methodological brand. And it has a history. Sometimes it has a bad name in some disciplines, and in some disciplines it has a good name. But it always comes down, I think, to the question of what you did, and did you rightly or appropriately connect or link your method and the type of conclusions that you draw, or did you use the word ethnography to justify things that your readers will not be persuaded by them for this or that reason? And I think that the main thing about ethnography is, I think everyone here said it, is the idea that you're studying everyday life. You're interacting with the people you study. You're studying culture. You want to understand how people experience and live their daily life. But which word you use in your dissertation, if your advisor thinks it's not the political thing to do in your discipline, okay, okay. Too bad, but, I think, so this is my answer. I don't know if I answered.
Aviv? We have some questions. Yeah, questions.
Questions?
From the floor?
Maybe just let me see if you
Okay.
see if you want to respond.
Just a word about language. And I realize the importance of having the
זה יעזור אם תשתמשו במיקרופון.
I'll shout. I think it's tremendously important to be able to participate in the process of learning. And in that sense, not knowing things that we believe clearly to be known puts us in a wonderful position. But I want to be careful in one thing. I'm convinced that much of the Hebrew spoken by many Israelis is a foreign language for me too. And in that sense, I would not like to create a full dichotomy or say that that participating in a language community means by definition understanding the totality of that community. We're always in a position when using language that we learn a new language, even with speaking the same language. So that's with respect to Aviv's problem, which is over a long time ago, fortunately. I mean, but a doctorate is an obstacle, so always surrender. Give up. There are other places where to study and to learn. And the doctorate is something you need. So if you manage to put together learning and writing a doctorate, it's fantastic. But many times it doesn't work that way. A word on education and anthropology. I know of many anthropologists that are not ready to acknowledge that in education anthropology is done. Okay? I know of many anthropologists that will not agree that anthropology is done within those circles that do ethnography of education or anthropology of education. There are tensions there. Now, if I give up on the word ethnography and I'm able to give a good description of what is it that I'm doing, okay, and I think there we have to be careful. That's the way I think Stanley started, by describing the some minimal things that need to be done. Then I don't care how you call it. If you're doing a good job in trying to describe how things get done in very detailed ways, without any strong preassumptions, then you're in the direction of doing a good job. And I don't really care how you call it. I do care about those producing research in the social sciences that are not using this method. Okay, about them I worry a lot. About their products I worry tremendously, because unfortunately I know that they dominate the real world of politics more than any product of my research.
Are you referring to quantitative researchers?
Most.
Or even...
Not mostly, but not only.
So even in qualitative work you feel...
Oh, there's plenty.
Right.
In education, I think you can find plenty of qualitative work which is totally relevant. At least for me. I mean, there's so much of it. So much. It's unbelievable.
The first, thank you very much. I'm enjoying so much your conversation, actually. And I didn't expect that these old and classical questions, they can raise such a vibrant discussion, really. But and I want to add maybe one dimension that somehow no one mentioned this morning. And Tamar mentioned, you talked about several political limits that you call us to free the anthropology from them. And I want to add maybe to this list one component, or one classical and I think ideological characteristic of classical ethnography. It's its individual nature. So the ethnographer or anthropologist who works alone, writes as an individual, not in the framework of the research team or exhibition, or team group or research group. And I think that maybe in the past or in the classical anthropology, it was part of actually of establishing this way of knowing the world and of anthropological research. Today, I can see, or I consider this individual nature of this knowledge production as a quite political limit that that limits us as a discipline and the ethnography as a method. And I would question it and also add it to this list of these suspects to discuss. Because today I think that the phenomenon that we study, and also the academic regime in which we exist, encourage us and call us to work together, and many other disciplines, most of them actually, move some of them in the classical way and some of them only recently, to work within the research teams and from the beginning of the research and write together and research together, thinking together. And it's also not only because of these reasons that I mentioned, also because I really believe, I think most of us today believe that we do not create our knowledge as individuals. It's always dialogical, trialogical, it's created by discussing and knowledge flows, and we actually create it collectively. So I want to ask you, what do you think about this idea of doing ethnography together in research teams? Because I think that even today, then when we apply for research grants for anthropologists, it would not be accepted so obviously then we propose an ethnographic anthropological research by team, yeah, or even together, no? So, but not only on pragmatic or practical level. I would like you to speak, to discuss it on the level of how it is necessarily, or what is this individual nature of ethnography today, how it stands.
There were just two terms. I'll just mention them quick because it's a great question. It's a question that allows to relate to all the questions that we discussed here from a different angle, because it raises all those questions of legitimacy and how it's done, and worldview, etc., and senses. I'm just mentioning two ways. I'm sure that there are more. The Labinar by probably Stanley knows more about it. The Labinar way that Paul Rabinow had which takes from the sciences, the seminar and the laboratory, or what I heard once from George Marcus, I think, the studios, taking it from the artistic world, not from the sciences. So let's work in a studio, take it more to the artistic relations between a group of architects or artists or whatever. So for sure, the ways can be, and I think are, more and more collaborative, but on the other hand, as long as we are still producing, and that's also political, text, it's like writing a novel in a dew. I mean, it's done, but mainly still most novels are soul written. So the production, and anthropologists met, I think it started by delegations, groups of researchers that went to do research, like in exact sciences or like life sciences. Most of our great anthropologists worked with groups, but then there are a lot of texts that are written by two. You know, the Komarovs just come to mind, and many others. So on one hand, there is this icon of anthropology, the soul, you know, the lonely writer, that person who's suffering from solitude, away in the field, nobody talks to her, she's longing for home and all that. And on the other hand, yes, I think it's a great question, and I believe that we're going to see more and more, for all kinds of reasons, more interactive fraction. Then the production will have to be more cubistic. You know, it's not going to be this Renaissance statue. It will be more broken and in a sense. But yeah.
And I think that one of the you raised a number of questions regarding the issue of individualism, being individualist or collective research. I think that one of the biggest problems with quantitative research is the fact that they are have to be committed to a pre-existing interpretive framework that is collective. For example, what is the meaning of the average? What do you do with the numbers? How do you interpret them? This is a collective framework that was developed by the scientific community. And then when they do their research, they're committed to these pre-existing rules and how you have to deal with the numbers or the data that comes out of.
And do you think we are not committed to?
And I think that we are that the fact that, or the biggest goal of the ethnographer is not to be, or at least to be, not to be committed to a pre-existing interpretive framework, or at least to try to, it's never complete. But you have to, part of the problem with ethnography is that you go into the field and you don't know. It's part of the emotional hardships in the process, that you don't know what you're going to find or how you're going to interpret it, and how, with what, you know, what you're going to find, what's your story, what's the story that you're going to tell. And this sense of freedom, it's not a freedom, it's also it's also a burden. But I think that this is one of the advantages of ethnographic work. And the question, and I think that in this process, you are much more, at least potentially, much more alert to creating the knowledge with the people you study, and not with your or the scientific community that sort of has defined your standard, your interpretive statements. Okay? You don't have. Yes. Now the thing about the political ambition, I don't know about political ambitions when you're writing. I mean, I know that some people will disagree with me, but I think that you should. I hope, or I struggle to be somewhat more humble about what I do. I don't know what's going to be the career of the paper that I produce. So to go into the field with a lot of a political agenda and what you want, how you want to change the world afterwards, or how you want to get
producing, working as anthropologists is always the soul thing, and then how about working in a
Is it possible to do a collective ethnography
collective
today?
ethnography?
It is, okay, so I didn't listen. Doing a collective ethnography, I think it's possible if you look at it as a way of getting different perspectives of the same data.
I think that I've never worked with a team and produced an ethnography formally, but I have my family. And I think a lot of ethnographers learn an awful lot from their children in the field, from their spouse or partner in the field, and they do the writing and their name is on the book or the article, but it's a collective encounter. It's a collective endeavor. And perhaps most people have this experience and produce ethnographies collectively, but they're for political reasons and economic reasons, their name is the name that's on the cover. Yeah.
And there were research about it, about the wives that were not on the cover of the great anthropologists. Yes.
Yeah. But I also want to agree very much with what Galit said, except that is keeping a blank slate and going to the field. I get very frustrated when my students feel it's very important to do literature reviews, and I tell them no one's interested what you think Foucault said. They can read Foucault. You'll put in Foucault afterwards. First, tell the world what you have learned directly from your experiences. That is going to endure. No one cares at all what you think about Foucault or about Marx or about Freud, and if you want to use these people, great, but don't let someone else set your agenda, basically. Try to, as Galit was saying, free your mind so that you set your own agenda on the basis of experiences that you're having early on in the field. That's why you need a long time in the field. You have to figure out what's going on and what's important. Although for research, money, you have to pretend very often that you have hypotheses and that there's a major question you're asking. Rarely have I ever produced anything that I planned on producing. Really, it always turned out to be something else.
I do think now, Yulia, that we are going to see more work produced. Like yesterday, I met with someone that I'm really hoping that something will come up, because in America, the 4 fields which have, in a sense, died as a site of producing knowledge together. I can see, I planned something with an archaeologist to do a dig in a dump yard that stopped dumping junk in early 1930s, okay? So there are now kinds of archaeologists of this sense where ethnographers and biologists and archaeologists work together. That we can see. Several anthropologists together, I think also. We shall see it more. It is hard, and I do see it, as Galit said, as a source of learning each other and challenging each other's interpretations. It is harder for me. I never wrote any project with anyone together. It's just hard. I think that the end product of ethnography as a literary text is very hard to produce, I think, in duo, but it's done. It can be done.
I just remembered one, I'm not sure, I shouldn't even give this the reference, but an ethnographic work in organization studies, which was done by a group, there have been such, especially in organization studies, because they have to prove themselves positivist enough somehow. And so what happened in this, when I read this paper, they compared their coding system and they ensured that the classification scheme was, and that each person agrees that the interpretation fits the code, that this is what they did, and what eventually came out is a very, very boring. So I'm not going to, so it somehow, it killed the story.
So actually you speak about it as a very marginal and very dangerous practice for anthropology. That's what I hear from you. And I think it is an ideological point of view and perspective ethnographic that I hear from you. Okay. But thank you very much.
I think I'm going to add something, but I don't know if everybody agrees. I have to say all humans are anthropologists without credentials.
No. I already disagree.
No, that's fine. We are at the university,
We have a discipline with a body of literature.
I have nothing against the literature, and I think that there are better trained anthropologists than others. I agree with that. But all humans, by the mere fact of being human, and to join the world, they apply anthropological methods. That's the only way to do it. Now, I'm strict with time, and I've been following the school on and off for 12 years. Now, have I done this alone? No, it's impossible. Have I been there throughout with others? Yes, that's possible. Now, my wife, as you mentioned, my family, taught me a lot about the school. For example, Rivka used to tell me I would never send my children there. Just trying to understand why was tremendously life for me. And she was reacting to what she was looking at, the stuff I was recording. That has been mentioned, but I want to mention the participants, the subjects, okay, who are they're continuously creating the knowledge with me. So in that sense, I'm not an individual. Okay, there are specific events that I cannot forget. After 4 years that I was working in a classroom with a teacher, she decided that I should learn something real, something important. And she knew I wasn't doing a good job. Or at least in her perspective, I wasn't doing it. So she showed me a couple of things. I have to admit that I might not have seen them otherwise. It took me 2 or 3 years to understand what little children in kindergarten were telling me about knowledge and how much fun they were making out of me because of what I was looking at. And they were telling me not to look at that. Okay? So in that sense, the individuality of the researcher, yes, I end up writing the papers. But I'm pretty not alone. I cannot be alone.
First of all, it's very interesting, all this talk. I'm feeling like a sujet clandestin here. I mean, an outcaster in a ship with other sort of outcaster, like that. And I did wanted to ask from my liminal place here, if it's not really like a world view, because how I understand it, it's like we have to listen. we have to put ourselves always in a liminal place and observe from this liminal place, putting all the grand narrative outside of our knowledge, deleting all our fathers of academic fathers, and really try to listen to the other. And this is like something I'm doing in my personal life. We try to do it in our personal life with our children, with our spouse, with our neighbors, with everyone around us. Really listen to persons. And from that place, you cannot be an ethnographer, I believe, or this kind of a researcher if it's not built in you as a way of life. That's what I believe.
I think it's a good question. You can't delete everything you know. That's not exactly what I meant, but if you go, when you go into the field, there's a certain point, I don't know what your experiences are, but my experiences are often that you go into the field and you realize that nothing you've read is exactly what you're seeing. There's not really any, I mean, there are tools and concepts and distinctions in the library. They can help you. But eventually, no one studied the context that you're studying. And you have to come up with something, to say something that is of value about what you're saying, and to persuade someone that it's worth learning from. And that specific minutes or moments in which you experience this, the sense of, wait a minute, what am I going to tell about the context? I think this is the most valuable thing about ethnography, that it's not, the method doesn't kill these moments. It doesn't try to weigh them down with pre-existing concepts. And that's what I meant. These moments are precious ethnographically. They're not the enemy. They're the rich points that are to be celebrated. And in that sense, you can't, of course, delete everything, but you hold that kid. And you acknowledge the fact that it's always beyond what you thought when you entered the field. And so that's what I meant. About the thing with other places or other contexts of action, like with your parents, with your friends, with your children, yes and no, because usually once you're an ethnographer, you're also in the role of an ethnographer. And the minute that you're in the role of the ethnographer, then there's some kind of strangers, I'm going to call it a professional stranger, some kind of distance that comes with that role. Just the responsibility of saying something of value or somehow interesting about what you're experiencing is itself, even structurally, it's a bit different than the situation with your children. But I do agree that part of the problem, for me at least, was to stop being an ethnographer, because in situations which are not academic and are not in the research, there's something, even when you get used to it, it's something almost comforting to be like inside and outside and distance and inside and looking, experiencing everything in a way that has to, you're inside the situation and then you're trying to immediately experience it intellectually and say something about it, and for me, I think it's dangerous. It's not. That's what I said in the beginning. That's why I don't think it should be an ideology, because in some situation, in other situations, I would like to be more present fully than I am as an ethnographer. And about personality, I think so. Maybe, I don't know. I guess it's an empirical question, but I don't know what psychologists would say about us.
I want to respond as well and link up what you said with what Sri said. I'm now agreeing with Zvi on this point, and to a degree, because anyone who's worked ethnographically with a group of people knows that some people have the capacity to objectify their own lives in a way that most people do not. And these people, if you're lucky enough to find them when you're in the field, they become your key informants, so to speak. And I think this is, I don't know where it comes from, psychologists might be able to figure it out, but some people are really anthropologists in a way, or ethnographers, in that they can, it has nothing to do with education whatsoever, nothing. That is formal education. It has to do with the capacity to actually see your life in the way that an outsider might observe. And I think it's a rare quality. And if I think of the people, my colleagues, I think some of them have it and some of them don't, even among my colleagues who are professional anthropologists. And I've worked with Alcoholics Anonymous in Mexico City for long periods, and some of these people are absolutely, if I ask my colleagues to get up to a podium and speak about their own lives and their problems for 15 minutes until the bell rings, they run out of things to say in 4 minutes. But you ask these people, these trained anthropologists in a way, these alcoholics who have been listening and learning how to objectify your life, and they get up on a podium, completely illiterate people, some of them, and they can talk forever, you know, about themselves and about their family, and that's why that research was so easy for me. They did it for me.
I wanted to ask, Tamar talks about ambiguity in terms of the methodology in the field and not being exactly certain what to do and how to answer each point, but I wanted to ask about ambiguity in writing and in representing your experience, because I think that's also an important feature or characteristic of anthropology or ethnography. And that's something that I find harder to do precisely because of the detail and the sensitivity that we are applying in the field and the kind of scope and amount of information and interaction that we experience and that we see as important. And then of course we can't reproduce all of that complexity in the writing. We have to choose, we have to, and that's something that, I mean, I think it's a big challenge of how to, also because the experience of everyday life is composed of more than just text. I mean, there's visual, there's other senses, and that can't be that easily transmitted through text. I've seen texts that are trying to do that. It doesn't always work. How do you transmit that complexity in writing?
I think also it's a very, very good question. Let's start with the fact that many times you are asked to minimize this ambiguity into, so what are you actually saying? So what is your thesis? And I've been blamed, you know, since I was a student and on, that I'm not clear enough. You know, that I'm maybe keeping more of this ambiguity than other people would like to read. And that one has to really sort of lead the reader into a more certain, clear knowledge of what you're saying. I usually refuse to do that. And at the same time try to say something. And that's hard. It is hard. And I think the discourse about the genre of ethnography, especially since, I think it always was, but maybe after the representational crisis, has come up with all kinds of techniques, like the multivocal, keep many voices alive, give a sense of different points of view, incorporating the informants into your text. Write more dialogical, or have all this techniques to thicken the text and work a little bit against the narrowing of the description, this rich world, into the thesis. But at the same time, it has to say something. Otherwise, it's worthless. As Galit said, you have to theorize it and say something meaningful out of this one time, one specific, never repeating moment or place that you've been to. And yes, the problem is there. And I think that you can always learn. You can learn. And it's also, at the end, it's a style of writing. And you can see people who are less ambiguous, and although they give you a rich text, and others that will try and, like, I remember when I had a seminar work to read La Vida by Oscar Luis, and I read the whole thick book about Puerto Rico, I think it was. And there was, it's just the life of this woman, the full life of hers, without saying anything about it. And then I think, I cannot remember if it was in the introduction or in the epilogue, 3 pages of this thick ethnography of her life that said something about it. So that's decision. That's an ethnographic, literary, political, ideological decision of how do I want to tell the story of this one lady in this one specific world. And it's a great ethnography.
My answer to your question about how you convey this complexity is to read great literature and poetry. Read Amos Oz, okay? And then you'll find out how to do it. That's not social science. Read Amos Oz.
And not only.
Not only Oz, but he is great.
So we're out of time, so it's a good place to end with ourselves. So first of all, just to thank you very much for the insights and answers, and Stanley for coming all the way, participating here with us today. The way we built the conference we're going on was to open these questions. There are a lot of answers. There's not one clear answer, and I think the idea here was to raise all of our awareness to these issues, to these dilemmas, to these questions, as we move on to our roundtables, where we'll continue with these topics. So thank you very much for raising questions.